Hello, everybody, and welcome to Expecting the Unexpected, How Businesses Can Avoid Becoming a Target for Cybercrime During a Crisis. I'm Lewis Evans. This is an Arctic Wolf webinar. If you were looking for Expecting the Unexpected, you've come to the right place. If you're looking for something else, you've come to the right place. We're going to learn some important stuff about handling the very unusual circumstances that we all find ourselves in. This is normally the bit where I'd say, let's wait a minute, let's let any stragglers join up. But I think let's dive right in. We're all ready to go. We're all available. So let's just get started right away. Before we get to the meat of the webinar, some quick housekeeping items. I'm Lewis Evans. I'm a product marketing manager with Arctic Wolf, and I'm on our COVID-19 research team. And what that means is, we've got a lot of different functional groups in our company that have their own roles in helping our customers and helping the broader community address this crisis. A lot of security experts of a bunch of different flavors. And so we've convened a lot of sort of cross-functional expertise to chip in and provide support and help align our business and help align our customers and provide security expertise to that broader community. And I'm playing a part in that. For this webinar, drop any questions in the chat and we'll discuss at the end. Anything we don't get to, we'll follow up with you. And you can reach me at Lewis-Evans on LinkedIn or lewis.evans@arcticwolf.com. And, you can see right there, those are my personal contact information. So, hey, reach out, drop me a line. I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to connect you with the right experts on our team to help address the kind of challenges that maybe you're facing. I'm calling everybody these days, so don't be afraid to reach out. You can follow along on Twitter with this and future webinars using the hashtag WolfChat. We did not try to do a long howl for our hashtag because you can't spell that. So hashtag WolfChat, sort of strikes the right balance, appropriately wolf-themed. People can type it, people know what it is. And finally, and this isn't part of my standard webinar notes, but I am recording this at home rather than in a specialized space, so I've done my best to pick a quiet time and a quiet place and set this up so that we can have a nice, clean webinar. But if there is any ambient noise from my neighbors or, what have you, I just want to apologize in advance. Everybody's got to sort of deal with the situation as it's arising, and I hope all of you are dealing well with it and are staying safe and staying well and in a position where you can continue working. I have those best wishes, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that can be accomplished and how your organizations can continue to protect themselves. So let's dive right into the agenda. So in this webinar, we're going to start out by talking about our COVID-19 approach. What our thinking is as a business, what are the principles that we've put together that guide our overall response. And I'm including that here just to contextualize both this webinar, our other activities, and the resources that I'll be pointing you to at the end. So, it's a spoiler-heavy environment. There are no secrets about what's happening later in this webinar. We'll start out with that company-wide approach. Next, we're going to move into a threats roundup, and we're going to cover 4 major categories of threats. Each of these have a couple threats underneath. We'll look at Zoom and video conferencing threats. Zoom and video conferencing more generally are, very top of mind right now. We'll talk about some cybersecurity issues related to those. Then we'll talk about phishing related to COVID. We're seeing a lot of that in different flavors, so we'll get into some of those flavors. We'll talk about institutional attacks, advanced work from home attacks. In each of these cases, we'll talk about the threat in general, we'll give some examples, and we'll include some security recommendations on what your organizations can do to protect yourselves, from each of these challenges. Then we're going to get into security recommendations sort of more generally. What are some best practices, good principles, effective strategies for dealing with our current circumstances. And that's going to be, a more general look, and we'll look at both short-term responses, the kind of things you might want to do, today or tomorrow or yesterday, but we'll get them done today or tomorrow. We'll look at medium-term responses, the kind of things that we can expect to do over the next weeks and months, and finally, just some longer term, more speculative ones. And then we'll finish with a resources slide, which should point you to some of the other materials that we're making available on this. And unsurprisingly, this is an evolving space. So the high level thing that I'm going to point you to there is our central updates page, which we continue to update with all of the public facing work that cross-functional team is doing. So please keep this in mind as a snapshot, but if you're listening to this, and especially if you're listening to this a little bit out, do go to those resources page, because that space is going to keep growing, and it's going to keep expanding as we put together more and more to support our customers and our community with our cybersecurity expertise. So let's jump right in. Our approach to the COVID-19 pandemic is guided by a couple of core principles. First one is that we're all in it together through this challenging situation. So that means Artic Wolf and our customers, Artic Wolf and our partners, Artic Wolf and the whole cybersecurity industry. Everybody's in it together, and we all have to start from this place. Well, everybody, but we're going to hear about some malicious actors who don't think about it the same way. But our philosophy is that when we're facing a crisis like this, we are all on the same page, we're all on the same team, and we need to do what we can to support each other, and everyone has their own sort of role to play, right? When we're all in it together, that doesn't mean everybody's got the same job. It means that everybody needs to identify, the work they can do that's most effective, most impactful, most important, and most aligned with their pre-existing expertise, pre-existing capabilities, and the most serious challenges. So Artic Wolf's a cybersecurity company, so we take that first initial philosophy and we say, what do we need to think about as a cybersecurity company? Well, cyber threats are going to evolve rapidly throughout this situation, and one of the lessons that we're all learning in every arena is that COVID-19 is not just a health challenge, but it's an everything challenge. I'm sure everyone listening to this can think about how what you do is being impacted by this challenge, by this threat. And what we think about as a cybersecurity company is how cyber threats evolve rapidly during moments of widespread uncertainty and destabilization like the one we're going through. And because cyber threats are evolving rapidly, because IT is remaining equally or more important to every organization that's operating today, that means cybersecurity is going to be a key component of every organization's COVID-19 response. And we believe that that's true. Hopefully you believe that as well. That's why you're listening in. You're thinking about, you're in a role that's encouraged you to think about, and you belong to an organization that's being, foresighted about the cyber threats that are going to, the risks, the cyber risks that you're going to face in this evolving circumstance, the threats you're likely to face, and you're interested in building cybersecurity that'll be an effective component of your organization's response. So those are our that's sort of going through the layers, focusing down into our area of expertise. What's our next? What can we do? Well, we can support our customers and the cybersecurity communities by sharing accurate, thoughtful, and actionable information from reliable open source sources and reliable open source threat intelligence, and from our own security experts and expertise. That's what we can do to help, and we're going to use every available avenue that we have to share the best advice that we can based on that open source intelligence and these insights from our team. And this webinar is part of this approach. And usually when I'm in a webinar, I talk about that webinar, but I want to continue to emphasize that this is something we're doing across the board. And if you're hearing about this because you frequently receive communications from us, maybe you've heard about some of the other stuff we're doing. And if you're hearing about this, you haven't heard so much about us before, I encourage you to, keep an eye on our website, sign up to our email lists and so on, because we're doing our best to, blast out that information every direction that we can. We think that we have a role to play, and we think we have an opportunity to help, and we're going to take that opportunity. And so the specific thing I want to cover in this webinar is some of the threats that we're seeing based on that open source intelligence, based on these insights from our team. Stuff you've been hearing about. We'll get a little bit more detail on attacks in the news, and how to think about it. Let's get started. So the first area I want to talk about is Zoom and video teleconferencing threats. So what's the context? Why is this a threat area that's expanded? Well, social distancing or quarantines or lockdowns have led to an explosive growth in work from home arrangements. Right now, 3 out of 4 Americans are under some degree of lockdown. And that's I'm recording this webinar in New York City. So one of the things that we definitely saw here was that some degree of lockdown doesn't mean that you can't get more locked down. One of the things that we've seen in world news is 3 out of 4 Americans are already feeling some of this, and there's room for it to expand. There's room for it to expand in new organizations. There's room for it to expand in new scope. So we're all in this space. There's going to be increased use of importance of video teleconferencing. It's a lot of business functions that used to be accomplished face-to-face are going to happen on VTC. One of the things that happens on VTC and with remote work arrangements is that a lot of stuff you didn't even know was face-to-face work has to be defined, has to be scheduled, and then has to take place on a video teleconference. And for a lot of you folks, that's going to be Zoom. For many of you, perhaps it won't. And one of the challenges, sort of underlying context coming in from the other direction, technology challenges, is that a lot of VTC platform development has been optimized for ease and performance and shiny features and all that sort of stuff, and not necessarily security. And as a cybersecurity company, it's always easy to point and wag a finger. But I don't begrudge video teleconferencing platforms. They had a business niche, in the previous situation, and they were building the right set of features to help their customers expand their market share, fill that niche. And now they have a very different niche. They represent just a huge chunk of the infrastructure that's keeping organizations operating and keeping businesses afloat and holding society together, and their priorities are shifting pretty dramatically. But because that's the case, there's maybe a gap between where the technology is now and where we would want it to be to address the kind of challenges that it's seeing today. So what are the threats? Well, I'm not promising this is a comprehensive list. Certainly, we've heard about other privacy and security challenges before, and we're likely to hear more as this situation develops. The 2 I want to highlight are Zoom bombing and war dialing. Zoom bombing is a fun little name. That's where the little bomb icon on the slide comes from. It's for where malicious actors find a Zoom meeting and log on to disrupt it. So going back to that sort of structural question, Zoom is designed to be very easy to get into. It's designed to make it really easy to share a link and pop on the call and see your grandma, and it needs to be designed that way for it to function in the role that it's currently occupying. But that means that under a lot of basic settings, it's easy for malicious actors to hop on to a call as well. And the malicious actors that we're seeing here really are sort of classic baddies out of the sort of ancestral pits of villainy of the internet, right? So far, a lot of the reporting around this has been trolls, people who are motivated by hateful views or merely looking to sow chaos. But it's a real challenge. And if you're having a meeting or you're on a personal call or your kids are attending a class and it gets Zoom bombed, you're going to know about it. Unlike a lot of cyber threats, there's no risk of a stealthy, long-term, secret Zoom bomb. But it's going to be a real issue, and it imposes real costs, right? The meetings that we're having on Zoom now are how organizations are running. And if some of them are disrupted, that's going to pose challenges to continuing to run our organization. War dialing is sort of a little bit more sophisticated. This is software that was recently rolled out that's just used to guess all possible meeting IDs. And that ID can be used to extract the meeting data, right? So obviously it can be used to attend an unsecured meeting, but you can also just, guess a million meeting IDs, or million's not necessarily the right number there. You can guess meeting IDs in an automatic fashion. You can, there's a certain amount of security around this, but it's been shown by security researchers that you can circumvent this. You can guess a high volume of Zoom meetings automatically. And when you've done that, you're able to access the details of the meeting. And that means, the host, the name, the subject of the meeting, and the timing. And even that could pose a threat. Obviously, you could war dial to get a particular Zoom meeting and then attend it, secretively with the hopes of spying on it, although that might be noticed by the attendees depending, or, maliciously in that sort of Zoom bombing case. But you could also just sit down and write down what the meeting's about. I don't think it requires all that much imagination to think about how a malicious actor who knows the name and time and host of every meeting at a large organization could use that to perform all sorts of malicious actions. They might use that to extract the sort of data that will make another cyber attack or another scam or attack more plausible. They might use that to identify, vectors of attack for subsequent cyber attacks, or they might use that that's exploitable data on its own. Certainly, if you imagine the senior, a C-suite officer of a company is holding a Zoom meeting that's shown up on my war dial, and it's got a name like restructuring or acquisition or, merger, well, that's valuable information right there. So what are our security recommendations? Well, security recommendations, it's always a little like you visiting your doctor, because you're going to get the same good advice every time. I can't say a lot other than that advice is good for you. So specifically for these video teleconferencing threats, the Zoom bombing, certainly not exclusive to Zoom. The war dialing, the specific code that was put together by these security researchers was trying it for Zoom, but there's no reason to expect that this threat is exclusive to Zoom. You want to use meeting passwords by configured policy, all right? So use meeting passwords, that's a great idea. And if you're in a role in your organization where you can set the policy of your video teleconferencing application so that every meeting starts with a password, that's a great idea. And if you're not in a role where you can make that happen, you should encourage it to happen. To avoid some Zoom bombing, to avoid the disruption of Zoom bombing, wherever possible, you can configure meetings to be speaker only. And in general, you should evaluate your security policies around your video teleconferencing meetings, naming, inviting, sharing, a lot of, going back to that sort of underlying structure or attitude, a lot of us have operated for a while from this sort of perspective of, hey, share around the meeting link, don't worry about it, publish it. It's just time to be more careful. It's time to be more cautious. It's time to remember that, hosting a video teleconferencing meeting is, especially in a world where threat actors or malicious actors are thinking about video teleconferencing, what they can do about it. It's not like leaning over to the person next to you. It's a little like hosting a webinar, right? It's not like placing a phone call. It's not like having a discussion in person. It's not even like sending an email or a really locked down mode of communication. Obviously, emails are not the most secure thing in the world, but it really is kind of like having a webinar, and you just need to make sure that your security is in the right place and your policies are in the right place to manage. The next threat I want to talk about is phishing related to COVID-19. So phishing attacks involve sending deceptive emails to collect sensitive information. And phishing success relies on crafting a message so that targets are willing and eager to engage with, right? That's the sort of social dimension. Obviously, when you talk to a cybersecurity company, we often, start from the technical dimension, although I think Arctic Wolf, with our focus on personal security expertise, may be a little bit better than average on that. But phishing success is as much social as it is technological, right? It's as much about identifying the kind of message that someone really wants to interact with, and framing your malicious or deceptive message in a way that's going to encourage that interaction, as it is about anything else. And the COVID-19 pandemic has created a wealth of themes for new phishing campaigns. So what have we seen? We saw a really, getting back to the technical dimensions, really pretty technically sophisticated phishing campaign that pretended to be a news alert from the WHO, and it leveraged, a domain spoof and an IP spoof and so on and so forth to get through advanced threat protection mail security solutions and stole targets' Office 365 credentials. And this was just news alert, WHO, coronavirus in your area, or something to that effect. No doubt, for every campaign that you're hearing about in this sort of detailed way, there's a lot of stuff on the same themes that's going out that isn't necessarily rising the level of news. Another theme that people have been exploiting was stimulus payments or other financial relief, pretending to be a government program, pretending to be a philanthropic program, pretending to be a particular individual. We saw a campaign up in Canada that was offering money. It said, the Canadian government has created these checks, but it was, if you clicked on the links, you got malware instead, which is pretty much what it means when you got a phishing campaign. I can't, I'm sorry, but I'm not exactly surprised you didn't actually get your check by clicking on that link. So we've seen some of those already, and we're also seeing some interesting reports about how more are coming. Phishing campaigns, sometimes we can see in advance. There are security organizations out there that monitor the universe of domains that are being registered. And they've noticed a sharp uptick in suspicious domain registrations around the stimulus, right? Or around payments and, government relief and all that sort of thing. And before the campaigns go out, of course, it's impossible to tell which domain is in fact going to be malicious, or impossible to tell with certainty. Maybe someone is buying get stimulus check now coronavirus 19 .ru with the best of intentions, but we don't think so. We think we're going to be seeing a lot more of this, especially as relief programs continue to develop, as we continue to sort of process the economic hit, and it becomes more and more top of mind. So that's another theme we're going to be hearing a lot about. Another area we've seen are fake charities, and this is a phishing scam because it goes to your lands in your inbox and it tries to collect something of value from you under false pretenses. And in this case, the false pretense is very simple. They ask for your money, and they are gonna keep it. The particular campaign purported to be collecting donations for the WHO. It wanted those donations in Bitcoin. WHO is at the front, it's very technologically cutting edge in a lot of ways. They are not out there soliciting donations in cryptocurrency. And finally, so, what have the themes been here? We've seen, fear, concern, and curiosity in those fake news alerts. We saw self-interest and care, and I don't mean greedy self-interest. I mean, people are worried. They're looking out for themselves in the stimulus payment. We saw altruism attacked in these fake charity scams. And finally, the fake cure stuff is attacking hope. And scammers really are going out there, and they'll exploit anything that they can take advantage of. And one of the things they can take advantage of is hope. And a lot of people are scared right now. A lot of people are worried, for their own health, for the health of their loved ones and their communities. And when people want something like that pretty badly, scammers are going to be there to take advantage of it. The reported attacks around this are often a little more involved. They have more of a personal touch. They'll purport to be some news about a possible cure. Sometimes that's just an excuse to grab Office 365 credentials. We've also seen a lot of reports of scam attacks where they're trying to start a conversation with the target. And that's either going to be to extract PII, medical information, other personal information, or just money, just reaching out and saying, hey, you may have been selected to participate in a trial of a exciting new treatment or a vaccine, and here's going to be the fee to enroll, and here's going to be that sort of thing. So, what can we do as security professionals or professionals with a security responsibility or focus? Well, first off, user training. I know this is, another doctor tells you to eat your vegetables. You come back in 6 months, doctor tells you should eat your vegetables. You got to eat your vegetables. You got to train your users. And I would emphasize this. I would say, listen, we expect to see more scams focusing on the coronavirus. We expect them to have a bunch of different dimensions. They'll pretend to be news that you need. They'll pretend to be important government updates. They'll pretend to ask for your help or offer to protect your health. Communicate with your users. You're all in, or I don't know, 100% of your roles. A lot of you folks are going to be in IT, and what that means is you're in a position of responsibility and trust. And in an uncertain environment like we find ourselves, that can be really important and really powerful. And so if you can communicate, hey, these are not the avenues that you should expect honest updates on these important issues. We at your organization are going to, keep doing our best to keep you up to date on those, and don't interact with something that's, making these sorts of claims. Don't look for all the standard phishing warning signs. That's going to be really powerful. Then, mail security and hygiene. There are mail security tools out there. You should have them in place. You should have them stood up. Not everything is going to be stopped by that. The top item there was a exploit that was out in the wild, detected, bypassing advanced threat protection, and that's got advanced right in the name. So, but that's not a magic bullet. And so you'll probably want something like detection and response as well. You'll want to have a solution in place that will let you notice when your users are being phished, so you can intervene at a more personal level, or you can go in and change credentials on compromised accounts. You can prevent a next round of phishing emails from being distributed across your organization, so on. And you should turn on MFA. You should always have MFA turned on. That's going to be really powerful because it's going to interrupt in phishing. A substantial portion of phishing is out there trying to steal credentials. MFA is pretty effective at blunting that kind of credential theft attack. All right, let's talk about institutional attacks next. The context around this. High-profile institutions are more frequently targeted by more sophisticated, more dedicated malicious actors. This is just true in general, right? If I were to go out tomorrow and make a movie with my friends and set up a Gmail for that, I would not be getting hit by anything particularly fancy. And Sony's out there and they're making a movie and they're getting hit by the North Korean government, right? And that's just because the higher profile the organization is, the more valuable its assets are expected to be, and also the more cyber criminals have heard of it. The more the sort of people who do advanced, sophisticated, thoughtful, we're gonna break in and we're gonna think about how to break in until we break in kind of attacks. They need to hear about an organization. They need to get their attention drawn to it, and that always goes to high-profile organizations. The thing that's changed is that because of the COVID pandemic, certain organizations are dramatically higher profile than they used to be. So organizations like the WHO, probably you'd heard about the WHO before you heard about COVID-19. Probably you think about it a lot more now. If you imagine in 2018, how often were you thinking about the actions of the World Health Organization? It's gone up pretty dramatically. Healthcare organizations, obviously higher profile, biomedical research, government and NGO, and more. Even potentially the kind of research institutions, research not necessarily in the biomedical research sense, but the sort of people who are doing data science, reporting, aggregating this kind of data, wide range of institutions that are going to be more in the public eye, and that means more in the attacker's eye as well. So let's talk about some threats. Brno University Hospital experienced a cyber attack. This is a major Czech hospital involved in COVID testing, and it was forced to shut down by a cyber attack. Now, the details of the cyber attack are not public. Based on the profile of the events, it was likely ransomware. We don't know what strain it is that we would have to wait on whether they're choosing to disclose those kind of details. And Interpol sees more coming. They've put out an alert. They're seeing a rise in ransomware attacks against healthcare providers, and they expect that rise to continue. They expect that to continue. We heard a little bit of news reporting, sort of in the very early days of the pandemic, that certain malicious actors were cutting back on their activity in response to the sort of universal "we're all in this together" sentiment. Good for them. I can't agree with their choices in general, but if anyone does that, they has chosen to avoid committing a crime to help protect the health of others. Good for them. It certainly hasn't been universal. And one of the things that's scary in general, of course, is if some malicious actors are spinning down their activities and some malicious actors are pushing it way up. The push way up ones can really outweigh anything there, and so medical organizations, which are expecting to get hit in their central business of saving lives by the pandemic, can also expect to get hit by more cybercrime. I wish I had better news. That's what I got to report. WHO, we talked about them. They faced a much more unusual and sophisticated cyber attack. Some security researchers noticed that malicious actors were building an imitation of WHO's internal email system. They sort of noticed in real time this whole elaborate imitation portal being built up. And the anticipated purpose, obviously you can't call up a malicious actor and say, hey, I've noticed that you're halfway through a cybercrime. Like, what is the cybercrime? What's the plan? I mean, you can. You can't trust what they say back if you have their phone number, and I don't exactly trust that you have their phone number. But the expected purpose of this particular attack, or this particular prepared attack, was to achieve persistent account compromise within WHO. So steal a lot of email credentials, keep them stolen, gain access to these accounts, and maintain ongoing access, persistent access to these accounts. And the likely goal of that attack would be to collect pandemic information. A lot of that information could be very valuable. WHO is going to perform a lot of internal modeling. They're going to coordinate with a lot of organizations about medical research, about what resources are available where, about where the disease is getting better, where it's getting worse, and that information could be exploited in countless ways by a lot of different actors. There's, it's not hard to imagine how that could be exploited for economic gain. It's not hard to imagine how it could be exploited for national security gain, and it's not hard to imagine that organizations, any organization out there that's understood to have an information asymmetry of any kind, that has any sort of internal information about COVID-19 that's not fully public, might be exposed to pretty sophisticated people who really only want to get in. They're not necessarily going to smash and grab this time, but who really are interested in reading all your emails. Security around these kind of things is hard to recommend. And the reason it's hard to recommend is because the fundamental characteristic of an advanced persistent attacker, well, persistent really refers to sort of dwell time on compromised systems, but the fundamental characteristic of a human attacker, of someone who's made the specific sort of operational decision to pursue a particular target, is that they are willing to attack where an organization is weakest. And they're willing to try a bunch of different attacks and figure it out. And, all of the sort of interesting cyber attacks are inevitably, hey, the attackers wanted to get into the system. They knew what the target was. They were willing to spend some time thinking about it. They tried a bunch of obvious stuff, and then they started trying non-obvious stuff until it worked. And so it's hard to make a recommendation around that. Each of your organizations is going to have different weak points, different, security tools that are well established and are doing a good job protecting you in some way, exposing you in others, and it's almost not responsible to give a couple particular recommendations when you're thinking about, well, how can I confront someone who will respond to the areas where I'm strong by seeking out where I'm weak. So the things I'll say in general are, user training remains vital, and user training remains vital particularly because people are going to be facing an unusual level of threat. And folks in general are trusting, they're collaborative, they're helpful, and they're not always wearing their cybersecurity hat, And an organization that it's not used to being hit with a lot of sophisticated attacks is going to have a lot of folks who aren't wearing that hat. And we need to make those hats, and we need to put them on everyone in our organization. Not to go too far in that metaphor, but making sure that cybersecurity awareness is something that's in the minds of people, even during this very difficult time, is going to be really important in managing and mitigating these attacks. And then the next thing I do want to talk about is detection and response. And I think that detection response detection response capabilities, something that sort of really sophisticated cybersecurity thinkers say is the biggest threat to a persistent, competent attacker. I believe the former head of the NSA has an interview where a bit more technical language that I'm using here, but talks about how a dedicated attacker fundamentally expects to be able to make it around any particular defense that you have in place. And what they're not necessarily prepared for is for that intrusion to be promptly detected by other cybersecurity experts, and that the vulnerability that's exploited to be identified and resolved, or the compromised accounts to be immediately booted out of the system. And that's why having detection response is an important part of responding to sophisticated attackers, preparing for them. But please don't take these two items as me saying those are the only two things you have to do. Really, it's even worse than eat your vegetables is, all the good advice at once, right? Like, you need to go through your whole organization. You need to identify your cybersecurity tools that are effective right now. You need to make sure that they're all, tuned correctly, operating correctly, that you're clearing the alerts from them. You need to have a holistic approach, and probably the two sort of biggest umbrella activities that can support that would be user training on one end and detection response on the other. All right, let's talk about advanced work-from-home attacks. The context. Work-from-home workforces are at risk from basic attacks such as phishing, account compromise, and so on. And I think we all are aware of this. But there are more sophisticated attacks that can be targeted at remote workforces as well. And we haven't historically worried about them as much because, we keep the crown jewels at the office, and it doesn't tend to be worth an attacker's while to build a really sophisticated attack against these work-from-home populations, but that's going to change. And home offices can be less secure than company offices in unexpected ways. So let's talk about two threats that we saw that might be relevant in that space. First one was a USB malware attack. This was a USB stick mailed to targets with an apparent gift card and instructions to use. The USB stick imitates a keyboard. USB keyboards have a high set of permissions. They plug in, they automatically get permissions to, type. That's how a USB plug-in keyboard works. That means if a USB key is pretending to be a keyboard, it immediately gets some very scary permissions the second you plug it into your machine. And in this particular attack, it abused the permissions to install malware. It exploited a multi-stage thing. You can read more about this in some of our more detailed reporting. And it would take over the target system, essentially. I think it's worth noting the reporting on this is not entirely clear, but reading between the lines, I think the gift card was fake also. So you didn't even get your prize. The next attack that we saw is very different. Sort of falls under this overall theme of, hey, what's something that you might happen at home that you're not necessarily top of mind, but represents a serious risk. And this is a new brute force attack we're seeing against Linksys routers. So people are going out there identifying Linksys routers that are attached to the open internet, brute forcing not the endpoint, not a server, not a user account at some cloud service. They're just brute forcing the router. And the thing about the router is the internet traffic goes through it, and you can introduce redirects at the router level. And so once they gain access to the router, they're introducing malicious redirects, and they're able to direct common internet traffic to their own site, which is then used to install malware and steal credentials and sort of the whole laundry. I don't mean to sound bored with it, but once the bad guys gain control of a system, or they have an opportunity to gain control of a system, and they've routed around most of your defenses, they tend to do sort of they have a couple sort of tactics that they often return to, and you just see a bunch of them here. So what are our security recommendations? First of all, security training. We've been talking about this, a lot, but I think the theme here to emphasize is that the home office is the office, not the home. Home office is the office. not the home. And obviously it's happening at home in the sense that your kids are there and your fridge is there and it's in your living room and it's in your neighborhood. But in terms of operating as a target for cyber attackers, you need to think of it as a place that's exposed to the kind of threats that you'd face at the workplace, not just the kind of threats you'd face at home. And you need to think about it that way because we're all working from home. Attackers know that you're working from home, and they're going to operate equivalently. And so I think this is another place to talk about the effectiveness of detection and response. And it depends, obviously, on having a detection response solution that's able to collect the right sort of endpoint and cloud data and so on and so forth. And you won't necessarily be able to notice everything, but, for example, the right detection response solution would be able to notice if an endpoint had a new USB device attached, and you might be able to let that employee know or lock down the right accounts before the malware or lock down the right endpoint, before the malware was able to take advantage of it. This is going to be necessary because we can send our good security hygiene messages out there. We can say, hey, it's your home. Your home is now your office. Don't open mail. Don't plug stuff into stuff. Go in and re-up your security on your Linksys router. But fundamentally, it's going to be hard to institute those policies in the same way that we could at an office where we had, sort of more points of control. Okay, so that covers some of the major sort of attack themes and attacks that we've been seeing in the news recently. Let's talk about overall security recommendations. What we've been thinking about, or what we're thinking about, is sort of three stages of security in the face of the COVID crisis, the COVID situation. First thing to do is secure the emergency. That means focusing on work from home security training. If you have that in place for a portion of your remote workforce, that's really good. If you don't have that, you need to get that spun up. That means security awareness in the home environment and secure use of work from home tools. Folks aren't used to either of these, and when you have a user who needs to get something done but isn't aware of how to do it safely, that's the sort of moment of biggest risk. The next thing to get in place are remote security solutions. So that's going to be classic bread and butter stuff like a VPN, which will let you securely tunnel in to a protected network to access business resources or business systems. Multi-factor authentication. You're going to want to make sure that you have endpoint visibility, detection, and protection. A lot of folks have been, or a lot of the sort of more advanced cybersecurity world has relied on defending the network one way or another, right? We're in the we're in the building business. We build firewalls, right? We need to move beyond thinking that way. We've needed to move beyond thinking that way in general for a while, but I think there's nothing that really drives that home more than this new work from home world that we operate in. And that means that we're going to need cloud security monitoring. Whatever that means to your organization, you're going to need to be able to monitor the cloud tools that you're using and that are going to become increasingly central to your business. And you're going to need cloud-based security solutions, right? You're going to need to make sure that your tech stack isn't reliant on a security tool that's running in some hardware that you can't really access on a network where your most vital assets no longer are. So that's the sort of short-term stuff. And I know I said that was a today, yesterday, tomorrow. That's maybe a little ambitious for all of that, but that's the sort of immediate high priority space. But we don't expect that this is this is not going to be a week and a half disruption. It's gonna take time, and how much time it's going to take is going to depend on where you are and your local circumstances. And so you need to be prepared to sustain this remote security. So that means maintaining your security best practices. So maintain access to evolving threat intelligence. And threat intelligence, has sort of two faces. There's the intensely quantitative, technical detail, like here's a list of 10,000 new IOCs that we discovered yesterday. Here are the malicious domains. You need to make sure that that's set up. And it also has the qualitative face, which is the sort of stuff we're talking about now. And the sort of resources that we're trying to provide as well. Maintaining awareness of the new threats that are coming out and the kind of techniques that are effective in stopping them. And you're going to need to maintain your vulnerability management and patching cadences. and that's important because a lot of how we have historically done this has relied on not 100%, but it's often the case that we've relied on physical access to the systems or various other sort of elements of our situation that are no longer in play. And simultaneously, this is the kind of thing that often gets sidelined in a crisis, and it's sort of exactly the opposite, right? The more that you let your vulnerability management slip, the more areas of exposure you'll face to cybercriminals, and they're not going to be less hungry or less malicious in the medium term than they are right now. So that's something you just absolutely need to stay on top of. And you'll want to prepare for additional disruption, right? I think one of the mistakes that we can make right now is thinking, well, we got hit, right? It feels like the pandemic has happened to us, but really it's going to continue to happen, right? I'm noticing this in a very personal way, which is, I'm in New York. I'm trying not to go out very much and get food delivered, and I'll find a delivery place, and then I'll come back to it next week, and it'll be shut down, right? And that's obviously, it's not a very serious example, but the point is that the consequences, the ramifications of this situation are going to continue to develop and continue to evolve. And so you just need to make sure that your security solutions are robust against further workforce or supply chain disruptions. And this is difficult to talk about, so I'm going to try and be both, sort of delicate and direct about it. Right now, we're mostly thinking in terms of the workforce disruption of everybody having to work from home. But we can expect that there will be future workforce disruption around health and family emergency. Right now, everyone in your organization is working from home and they're doing okay. And that won't necessarily stay true. And, we're working hard at our organization to keep everyone safe and healthy. You're working hard at your organization to keep everyone safe and healthy. I really wish nothing but the best to everyone who's listening to this, to all of your loved ones and all of your teams. But you got to keep in mind that, we're just going to see ongoing disruption. And that can be a lot of stuff. And so we need to make sure that our security strategy is going to be robust against these further developments. And finally, the third stage, and this is the most speculative, is adapting to the new reality. Not just in the near term of handling this strange new circumstance, and not just in the medium term of continuing to manage as we face the disruption, but just understanding, what is this new normal that we're working towards? It's not the old model, and it's not what we see now, and there's not going to be a fixed cutoff. One of the most interesting things, I was reading some writing by a researcher on disaster response. One of the most interesting things she said is there's never a point when everything goes back to how it was, right? There'll be a point when people declare stuff over. There'll be a point when they say, okay, we're back to work or whatever it is. We're lifting the lockdown. New York is no longer on pause. That's probably, we call it pause out here. That'll happen, but the new normal is never going to be the old normal. And so we're just going to see a different world. And listen, it's very hard to predict what is going to change in a big way. I think we can all guess, we're all guessing that work from home is going to remain expanded for a long time and perhaps indefinitely. A lot depends on the mechanisms on that. Certainly a lot of, even after the official restrictions are lifted, a lot of individual employees or teams will have their own health or family reasons to want to sustain working from home. And depending on how our organizations, realign, that might become much more of a fact of life for many of us. We think, this is, again, it's intensely speculative, so I'm just sharing some thoughts that are based on, what we've seen about how organizations react and how they reorganize themselves, and we'll see what happens, and you can take it or leave it. But I think it's not an unreasonable thing to guess that maybe we'll be seeing organizations with more disaster planning. Maybe we'll start to see the emergence of a 2020 mindset. Organizations that are both more responsive to black swans and more conservative in operations, less willing to sort of operate out at the edge of their tolerance, less willing to sort of live in a just-in-time, zero-margin for error world, while simultaneously being more cognizant of the big risks out there. And the thing that I want to emphasize about that is, I can't promise that your organization is going to change in any of these ways, but I think that all of the ways that this is going to change, cybersecurity is going to be more of the story, right? It's really going to be, hopefully, we're going to be dealing with organizations that are more remote. They're going to be more cognizant of serious risk, and they're going to be more thoughtful about planning for it. And that means, that it's both important to prepare for having that new seat at the table, and important to push for it. It's important to respond to the circumstance by, helping your organization develop the kind of culture that's forward-thinking about risk, and where you're going to be able to provide some support and help protect your teams and your organization. That said, just wrapping up the speculative section with, title of the webinar, Expect the Unexpected. I can't promise that any of this is going to come to pass. It's just some stuff that we're some possibilities that we're considering, we're evaluating, and we're keeping our eye on, and maybe you might want to as well. So resources, promise this. This should be linked in our resources list with this webinar. We're doing COVID-19 updates from our organization in a single, continuous, ongoing place, arcticwolf.com/updates. Go there. You'll see everything that, we're putting out. It's going to be sorted top to bottom by what's most recent, most relevant. We've got a one-pager that we've put out about security fundamentals in COVID-19. Some interesting reading there. We're doing a blog series, the COVID-19 Weekly Threat Roundup. Right now it's got some more detail on these items, and pretty soon it'll have another week of threats, and it's going to keep going every Friday. We've got a couple blogs out there about the relevance of cybersecurity to work from home and remote arrangements, and that's going to keep growing as well. And so, please take a look at these resources. Please keep an eye on them as they continue to develop. We hope they'll be helpful to you today, and that we'll be able to continue to support your organizations going forward. And so with all that said, I want to say, one more time, we're here to help. We're wishing nothing but the best for everyone on this call, and thanks for taking the time to dial in. And so with that said, are there any questions?
All right. Let me take a look at the Q&A field. We're not seeing any questions yet. We still do have a couple more minutes together. So if there's anything that I've brought up that raises some questions and concerns, feel free to shoot it our way. And to give you all just that last minute to try that out, I'll just one more time talk through the resources we made available. We've got a number of webinars that we're doing. We had another webinar by the head of systems engineering at our organization, talked in a lot of detail about how to secure your remote workforce. We had this webinar. We're continuing our ongoing webinar educational activities. We've got that security blog series that I mentioned. We've got some other blogs. Looks like a question has come in. It says hello. Hello to you too. Hello to all of you. I hope that everybody's staying safe out there, that you're baking some good quarantine bread and not going out very much. And I think I feel fortunate, and I imagine some of you also feel fortunate to be in a position where professionally I can do a lot of my work from anywhere with a with a powerful internet connection. So yeah, let's see. Anything else? Give one more minute there for anyone to drop in any questions. Oh, well, one of those was just a piece of positive feedback. Thank you. I'm glad that folks have appreciated this. I'm glad that it's helpful, and I hope that there's some actionable steps there. As I guess I touched on the resources, but it's worth pointing out that one of the nice things about having both the webinar series that we're doing and some of the material like the blogs and our thread updates is that those are going to get a lot more technical and granular, right? So you can hear about the threats that we've seen in this conversation, and if some of them seem relevant to your organization, you can go and get those IP addresses or the hostile domains listed and so on and so forth. So what's the feedback regarding Zoom application? So we've obviously been hearing a lot about Zoom. My personal sense, and I think a sense that's shared here, is that in general we believe that Zoom is an institution that's trying to do its best, but it's facing an unprecedented security challenge. And the sort of philosophy we have in general as an organization is you can never solve security 100% with tools. You need experts. You need sort of this kind of expertise that can help lead your organization along a security journey. So, I know we've been seeing some headlines that are like, Zoom is malware. I don't believe that. I don't think that that's a useful way to talk about it. And I think that, in special circumstances like we're in now, it's also just necessary to use tools, right? And in ordinary circumstances, that's true as well, right? Like it's never the case that we can decide as an organization to only perform activities with no cybersecurity risk. What we need to do is, keep abreast of policies, keep abreast of best practices, and make sure that we're developing a layered defense. With the Zoom stuff, it's interesting because a lot of what we're interested in, a lot of what we see in sort of the cyber attack space is increasingly sophisticated multi-stage exploits that are designed to extract, credentials and so on and so forth. And in Zoom, the kind of threats that we're facing are these weirdly immediate threats, like maybe there will be someone on your call screaming at you. It's happened to a bunch of my friends, by the way, not at Arctic Wolf. We haven't had any of that in the business. We're operating on a secure basis around that, but like people I know personally have experienced this. So with Zoom, I think it can be, a reasonable part of how organizations are going to handle this. I think that it's not something that we need to automatically dismiss. But I think it's something we want to keep an eye on. And, it goes back to the sort of best practices, eat your vegetables way of thinking. We should be making sure that we're not using Zoom in a way that discloses more information than we want to share with the whole world, because it's a very effective tool for distributing that. So another note in here about, Zoom facing performance challenges. That's certainly the case, depending on where you are. They're definitely spinning up a lot. I think the hopeful signs we've seen with that organization is they're making some high profile, high expert cybersecurity hires. They've realigned their development organization to focus on and prioritize security. Again, this is public source information that I'm relying on. I don't have a secret shortcut into Zoom's internal policies and deliberations. And so, I think it's definitely going to be the case of it's not the case of a particular vulnerability. It doesn't seem to be the case of a malicious or a shady actor, but, an actor that hadn't historically prioritized security and privacy being pushed to the forefront of the global tech stack in a way that really exposes a lot of vulnerabilities. So, one of the questions here is, however, did this security issue get fixed in the last update? And I think that the answer to that, the philosophy that you'd have around that is like, I'm sure that some of the identified security issues got fixed in the last update. And I'm sure that we're going to hear about new security issues that weren't fixed in that update. Like, that's just the nature of the beast. So, I think that the question to ask yourself is with a tool like Zoom, what are the pros and cons? What are the trade-offs? How can we use tools that might be somewhat secure but less secure in a way that doesn't expose our business to risk? And again, how can we as IT and security leaders build out the kind of defense in depth and build out the kind of security expertise that can protect our organizations from the risks that we're going to have to take on in order to continue to operate. Got another note in here. Will this slide deck be available to attendees? It absolutely will, and we also will make the video available for rewatching. And so with that said, my contact information is at the beginning of this, and you're all going to be getting it. So we've come up on the hour. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. Please do take a look at the resources. They should be attached to this webinar. They're centralized. Our COVID-19 resources are centralized on arcticwolf.com/updates. That includes a lot of stuff that's valuable today, and it's going to include some more stuff that's valuable tomorrow. And so I encourage you to adopt the posture of, keeping an eye on those updates as they happen, keeping an eye on the kind of information that we're able to share and that, other sources are able to share. Thanks to everyone who attended. Thanks to the team at Arctic Wolf who helped organize this, and thanks to On24. I do want to say, please, everyone, stay safe to the extent that you're able to. Please do your best to follow the guidance that is helping to protect us and protect our neighbors and protect our families and communities. This is a real opportunity for good IT work to save lives, and not in an abstract macroeconomic, the march of technology way, but in a sort of real, individual members of our community within the next couple of weeks. The more that we're able to support the IT infrastructure that helps organizations keep operating and helps keep people home and maintain the kind of best practices that are protecting us from this disease, the more we're all going to be okay. And that's what I want for all of you. And that's my wish. It's not normally how I close out webinars, but it's unusual times, and I wanted to respond to them by being open and honest about it, because that's the way we're going to make it through. So Arctic Wolf is here to help. Reach out with any questions and concerns. If you're interested in hearing about what our security experts can do in order to provide personal, predictable protection that can help secure your organization in these remarkable moments, please do get in touch. We'd love to help support your organization through these challenges. Thanks again to everyone who's involved in putting this webinar together, and goodbye.